What's up, guys? It's Dom Kirby. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a cloud solutions engineer for Pax 8, specializing in the Microsoft Modern Workplace. Today, I'm going to show you how to use Power Automate to do a little bit of a fun flow. We're going to capture a dad joke from an API and post that dad joke into Teams. The purpose of this is to open your eyes to how Flow can be used to capture data and move it around. Flow has a lot of possibilities for moving data and automating workflows. Today, we're going to create a really simple API-based flow. We're going to capture a dad joke from an API. We're going to parse that dad joke, and we're going to post that dad joke into Teams. All right, guys, without further ado, let's dive into Power Automate, formerly known as Flow. Today, we're going to have a little bit of fun with Power Automate and just make a basic flow that goes and gets a dad joke because it's 2020 and people are nice enough to expose freely available dad joke APIs. We're going to post that dad joke to Teams. Obviously, the practical applications of this are relatively limited, but it's a good way to get your brain running on how you can capture data and move it around the Microsoft ecosystem. So today we're going to use Power Automate. We're going to use this site called Icon Has Dad Joke. And like I said, they've been nice enough to expose a free API. So we're simply going to follow their API instructions. We're going to capture a dad joke, parse it, and post it to Teams. So I'm in my trusty demo tenant here, and I've already logged into Power Automate. It's at flow.microsoft.com. So we're going to create a flow. It's going to give us some suggestions. In this case, we're going to start an instant flow. I'm going to call this dad joke Teams. And in this case, we're going to manually trigger a flow. You can manually trigger it using the Flow mobile app, which basically just gives you a button on your phone. Obviously, there's a ton of ways to trigger it. You can trigger it via webhook. You can trigger it when something's uploaded to a specific SharePoint library. Your options are endless, but I don't see a need to automate completely the dad jokes. So let's use a button. Perfect. So that's all we really need to do there. Now, if you didn't want to use an API, you could take a text input and have someone type in a joke, but that's no fun. So we'll add a new step here. I'm just going to search for HTTP. Now, this is a premium feature, so go ahead and get a trial. If you haven't already got a trial or you don't have premium yet, just you'll get a pop-up. You can start a trial right here on the spot. So it's pretty straightforward. This is going to reach out to an endpoint and grab data from it. So that's typically a GET request. And then we're just going to follow this really simple API documentation. I chose an API that's really easy to use, but does cover some of the basics of REST APIs. So you can see here, all you have to do is request the root of their website. So they've done some creative thinking, and instead of using a dedicated API endpoint, they just use their website and they leverage request headers to figure out what you're trying to do. Now you can see here, we use the accept header to figure out what kind of content we want. In this case, we're going to use JSON. The reason we use JSON is because that's the easiest thing to be digested by any particular parser. It looks a little funny, to humanize, but it's really great for parsing data out. So we're going to add an accept header here, and we want application/JSON. That's the type of data it's going to give back to us. One thing about this agent is they want you to send a user agent header. And the reason is they're using that to track and catch any bad guys or people trying to DOS their API. So I'm just going to call this Dom's test. You're going to want to use your own user agent. So it might be Contoso Power Apps or something like that, depending on the API. And it's really simple for this particular request. If you had an authenticated API, you get to show advanced options, put something in for authentication. For example, we could do basic and throw in a username and password, and it's going to be sent to authenticate against that API. This API, again, is open and free. We don't need any authentication. So we're going to get from this URL, we want it in JSON, and we gave a user agent so they could make sure that we're not doing anything crazy. Looks like I did a little crazy dragging there. So let's fix our header name. And that's it. So I like to name my steps. So you can click the three dots, and we're going to call this Get a Dad Joke. Biggest reason for that is if you get into team flows and collaborative flows, it's really important to name everything so that people understand what that step exists for. So this step here is going to go fetch some data, and this API is going to spit out some content. It looks something like this. So this highlighted part here is a JSON array. So it's got a joke ID, the actual joke, and then the status 200. In most APIs is going to mean success. Now we can't just use this data. We have to parse it. So we'll add a new step. We'll do search for parse, and it's called the data operation step. So in this case, we're going to parse JSON. So the content we want to parse you see this menu comes up here. We need the body of get a dad joke because the body is the data that's returned back. Perfect. And we need to do a schema. Now, you can manually type a schema. You can read the documentation. But what I can do here is generate from sample. I can copy this sample return they've been nice enough to give us here. Copy that, paste it in here, and hit done. So you can see it automatically generated a schema for exactly how this is going to work. So again, I'm going to name this step. We're going to parse the dad joke. What we're doing here is taking this JSON array that the API is giving us, and we're turning it into variables that we can use later on in the flow, and you'll see in just a second. So we'll do another step, and we're simply going to post this to teams. So we'll search for post to teams. You have a bunch of options here. We can do adaptive cards and wait for feedback. That's great for approvals and surveys and stuff. We can list all the teams we have access to and then pick one from that. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to post a message right here. So it's in preview, but it works pretty well. And if you haven't already signed into Teams, you're going to want to do that. So we're going to go ahead and wait for this. And it should be pretty quick so long as you're signed on to the same tenant. So it's going to pull in all your teams. So in this case, I'm just going to post it to the all company team because everyone enjoys humor. And we have to pick a channel. In this case, I only have one channel, so I'll pick the general channel. Now, here's where we can have a little fun and put in the dad joke. So you can see here, once I click here, we have all these different variables, particularly under the parse the dad joke step. We have the ID and the joke. Obviously, we don't really care about the joke ID unless we wanted to get advanced and save history to make sure we don't get duplicates or anything like that. We don't really care about that. We just want the joke. So let's say put in some context here, and we'll take that joke variable. Now that joke variable came from the parsing step, because if you remember, we have an ID and a joke. All right, so we'll take that that joke and we'll paste it in here. And that's it. We've already made the flow. So before we test it, let's get into Teams. By the way, this particular step here while Teams loads is going to paste it as you inside the Teams channel. What you could do is you could post it as the Flow bot, and the message would show as if it came from Microsoft Flow, but it would still put your name at the bottom of it. So there's no doing this anonymously. We'll use the web app here, and we'll get to this channel. Perfect. So what we'll do is we'll save this, and the next step is to go ahead and test it. So while we'll wait for it to finish saving, should just take a moment here. Perfect. Now that it's saved, we'll hit this test button here. And in this case, you could definitely use different functions depending on how you're triggering this flow. In this case, I'm just going to perform the trigger action. It's going to validate that I'm connected to Teams, which I am. And that's it. So this is simulating the button that's available in the mobile app. So I'll run the flow. Flow ran successfully, so I'll click done. You notice we didn't get any errors. So everything here is valid. It was able to get a dad joke, parse a dad joke, and go ahead and post it to Teams. So if we go look at the general channel, here we have a dad joke, hot and fresh from the API from Icon has dad joke. So go ahead and use this to experiment. Use this to experiment getting data from a very simple API and post it to Teams, and then start to think outside the box about what you can do with flows. And this can go all over the place. They integrate with Power Apps. You can do approval workflows based on Microsoft Forms and SharePoint. There's a ton you can do here. A common use case for an MSP would be to have notifications go to a Teams channel. For example, we use a lot of BitTitan and Skykick and the Microsoft Modern Workplace environments. We have service alerts that come to a specific Teams channel, so that when something's going wrong, we can go reference and see if there's anything open. Go ahead and give this a shot and let me know how it goes.